Hello, I'm Robert, and introducing you to my new article at Science 2.0. And this is about how we can vaccinate very quickly against COVID with technology transfer. So we're getting all these stories at the moment about the bottlenecks in the vaccines in United Kingdom and Europe. They've got a big, almost like a verbal battle about it. What people don't realise is that we could have had vastly more vaccines by now if we'd empowered the rest of the world to make them. AstraZeneca actually, who are at the centre of this well, they are one of the really good actors here. Because of their agreement with Oxford, then they committed to make the vaccines at no profit. Their books will be audited. They're not permitted to make any profit from the AstraZeneca vaccine for the duration of the pandemic. And they have done technology transfer to India, to South Korea, to Brazil, South Africa and Japan, and probably other countries by now. They've told them how to make the vaccine, they've given them permission to make the vaccine, and these countries will be able to make the vaccine. And at the moment, most of the vaccines AstraZeneca vaccines made in India and South Korea, some are made in the United Kingdom. And so we have vastly more of the AstraZeneca vaccines today than we would have had if they hadn't made these transfers. When it comes to the other companies, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Novavax and so on, they have not done this. So we have much fewer vaccines of those than we would have if they had done that. And it wasn't a condition of their funding that they that they do it without any profit, or that they share their vaccine with the rest of the world, share the technology with the rest of the world so that other countries can make it. And they haven't done that. And the World Health Organization, they're constantly, these countries are saying, we can make these vaccines. Give us permission. Tell us how to do it. We've got the technology, we've got clever people, the people with the intellectual ability to make the Pfizer Moderna vaccines, to read all the scientific papers, to listen, to learn how it's done. And there are people like that everywhere in the world, in almost all the countries that have got universities and so on. I mean, Brazil could easily make the Pfizer vaccine if they were given permission and shown how to do it, and some technology transfer. So why are we not empowering these people in this very unusual situation of the pandemic? And why are the wealthy countries being so basically miserly about these vaccines? So the thing to bear in mind, these companies made these vaccines with no risk to themselves. If all those vaccines had completely failed, normally a drug company risks $1 billion to bring a new vaccine into the market. But they didn't risk anything because that $1 billion was publicly funded. So surely the general public, so this is something our government did in our name. Whatever country you're in, if you're in one of the wealthy countries, if you're in the United States, United Kingdom or Germany, then your government funded the vaccines in your name. And they are there to represent you. The governments are here to represent us and look after our interests. They're not there to represent the drug companies. And it is not in our interests to do what they're doing. The World Health Organization, Dr. Mike Ryan talked about how our generation would be judged by the people in the future. And I like to think about it like, say, our civilization 100,000 years in the future. And to them, they wouldn't be impressed by our technology. Just like we look at punch cards and paper tape, but even more primitive than that. For them, it would be more like being able to start a fire. And that level of technology, our technology to them would be like what that level of technology looks to us. They wouldn't say, oh, they're civilized because they've got technology. They would say that we are civilized because of the way we work together, and because of our ethics, and because of the way that we actually are, well, what we think of as civilized, if you really think about civilized, it's not about technology. It's about having a civilized and ethical approach and moral approach, and also be rational and logical and sensible. And this is totally, it's not rational. What our governments are doing is not rational. It's not logical. It doesn't make sense. They're not serving their own best interests either. It's, as I've said here, the public, surely these vaccines were made with taxpayer dollars, underwriting all risks. The public surely have a say in what happens to them. And what is happening right now is unethical, illogical, harms the wealthy countries economically, and adds to the risk of new variants. And with the new variants, we've got them becoming more transmissible. This is because and we now know these vaccines are very good at stopping transmission, especially the Pfizer vaccine. And we could license the Pfizer vaccine throughout the world. There's no reason why Brazil couldn't be making the Pfizer vaccine. Few companies are actually using it because it's so expensive and it's in such limited numbers. But the knowledge is there to make it. The technology could easily be transferred with a few months with the help of the World Health Organization. We could, the reason everyone is using AstraZeneca is because of this agreement that means it's only produced at cost and it's very low price. The reason few people are using Pfizer is because they don't have such an agreement. That's the only reason, really. I know it's a new technology, but there are plenty of clever people around the world who could learn this new technology and could read the papers and understand it and understand the technology. It's not limited to, it's not only people in the United States or in Germany who are able to do this thing intellectually. So, and then the new variants, the risk of new variants is becoming more transmissible, and we recently heard that non-transgenic, normal mice, that the variant first identified in South Africa has been discovered, it has evolved the ability to infect mice for the first time. None of the other variants can do that. So that's a new potential animal reservoir. We don't know if it has got into mice, and we don't know if it could get from mice back to humans. That's not known. But it has that potential that mice can get the South African variant, the variant identified in South Africa. Mice can be infected with that. And we already know, of course, the mink can be. And so the more we get new variants, the more there's the possibility of it evolving new capabilities to jump back into new animal reservoirs. That's a new discovery. Just a day or two ago, they discovered that this can happen. And then we've got it evading the vaccines. And it just makes no logical sense to just let the virus do that. And then there's, so anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So hopefully this is going to actually happen, and that that something, I'm sharing this video in the hope that this will lead to people actually doing this. That just joining the voice, that many people saying this, but it's not appearing on the news. I haven't seen any mention of TRIPS on the news. I haven't mentioned any mention of the idea of using, I'll explain that in a minute, what that's all about. If you haven't heard the word TRIPS, then that means that you haven't heard this news story yet. So I'll explain all that in a minute, and so please share this with others to spread the awareness and explain it in your own way. And if you're an influencer or a journalist or a blogger for that matter, and be sure to use reliable sources. All this is based on the World Health Organization. It's the World Health Organization has been talking about hardly anything else for the last week or two than the need to expand our vaccine capacity and the capability of doing that. These are the doses we're producing. So first, before that, so I'll get back to that now, explain about TRIPS and the other ways we can do this. But first of all, I just want to say the situation is very positive for the in the near future, nearly everyone is going, all the adults are going to be vaccinated in the wealthier countries in the before the summer, just as the way things are at the moment. Only 3% in other countries like, but Brazil is one of the ones that are going quite ahead with its vaccine, so it's well over that already. But in some of the countries like in sub-Saharan Africa and with large areas of the world, then the COVAX is only going to be able to supply enough for 3%. India is going well beyond that because it's a vaccine manufacturer, but large areas of the world are only going to be 3% vaccinated by the summer. However, later in the year, there's going to be a huge, huge excess. If you, over that 3%, the COVID is going to be able, the COVAX alliance is going to be able to vaccinate over a quarter of their population. So that will include all the vulnerable, all the elderly, all the frontline workers, and start to work down to the younger people by the end of this year throughout the world, in all countries. Nothing like this has ever happened before. So that's the positive side. And then we've got this huge amount of pre-orders. So we've got the United States, and that's the United States got nearly as much as COVAX in pre-orders. And it actually turns out, if you look at the numbers, the United States has secured enough doses for 1.96 billion people. This is because of they expected most of the vaccines to fail, and in the end they all succeeded. Extraordinary record, all except those 4 vaccines that have they were actually withdrawn from phase 1, and very likely those 4 would have gone all the way to phase 3 if they put enough work into them, but they decided with all the vaccines there already to go on and do other things. So we haven't really had any failures, any proper failures. Everything from phase 1 goes to phase 2, everything from phase 2 goes to phase 3, everything from phase 3 is approved for emergency use, and then it probably going, and then surely going to be approved for full use. They're very safe vaccines. Remarkable record. So assuming that this continues with, and we've also got the inactivated whole viruses, that's the one class of vaccines that hasn't been approved for emergency use, one of the major classes, but very, very good early data on that as well. It's both safe and effective. So it really looks as if all the vaccines are going to be approved. And if that's the case, then the world total, we can vaccinate 5.45 billion people only on pre-orders. It's already been ordered already by the wealthier countries. And then if all the ones that are in the trials and they're all approved, they all go through, then we could vaccinate the entire world population and then vaccinate 2 billion people a second time with an autumn dose by the end of 2021. So by the end of 2021, just based on the vaccines we have already, then we will have lots of doses. But the big shortage is right now, and the first half of this year. And so you might say, well, why does that matter? They're going to get it eventually. Well, this is why it matters. And this is an example. He died, sadly passed away. Professor James Gita Hakim, and he was HIV specialist. He was very much involved in stopping HIV, in the fight against HIV in Zimbabwe. He's not he's not even got grey hair. He's not that elderly. He's a foremost heart specialist at the University of Zimbabwe, he was. And he was also working in clinical, he was not just an academic, he was working on the front line in the clinics and fighting against COVID, and he died on the 26th of January of this year of COVID. And he was never offered a vaccine, never offered vaccination against COVID. And in his obituary, his colleagues say he has left a void that will be so difficult to fill. And by that they don't just mean like what most people say, oh, he was a great friend, and so miss him so much. They mean a void in the Zimbabwe healthcare system. A huge void in their healthcare system that he's left. It's going to be so difficult for them to fill. They don't have many doctors, so if you look at the Zimbabwe, and it's got 2.1 doctors. This is 2018. It may be more since then, but this is typical for sub-Saharan Africa. 2.1 doctors per 10,000 people. It's 25 is more normal in the United Kingdom, the United States. And so with the population of 14.65 million, I make a little over 3,000 doctors. So the 6,000 doses of AstraZeneca would have been enough to vaccinate all the doctors in Zimbabwe. United Kingdom at the moment is vaccinating 500,000 people every day. So that means that in a single day they are vaccinating, well, a 20th of that would be 2,500. They are vaccinating, I mean, 2,000, so 3,000, it's more than 100 times. They could vaccinate, with a single day's doses, we could vaccinate Zimbabwe 100 times over all their doctors. Just with a single day's doses in the United Kingdom today. Today's doses of the United Kingdom, just 1% of them would be enough, would be more than enough to vaccinate all the doctors in Zimbabwe. So the France is calling on all the other countries. France is one of the good actors here. It's giving 1 in 20 of its doses to the weak, the poor countries. If United Kingdom gave 1 in 20 of its doses to Africa, then they could vaccinate Zimbabwe. That would be 1 in 20 of 500,000 is 2,500 to 25,000. So they could vaccinate Zimbabwe nearly 8 times over with just 5% of their doses every day. Vaccinate the doctors in Zimbabwe. These would be the ones who would get the doses, because that's the recommendation of the World Health Organization, that the first top priority are the doctors. And with so few doctors, you know, every doctor they lose is a tragedy in sub-Saharan Africa, and will take them a generation to build them back, because they have a huge brain drain that people learn to be doctors in Zimbabwe, and then they go off to other countries and become doctors could be a doctor in the United Kingdom, would say. So it's very difficult for them to get their doctors and retain their doctors. And every doctor that dies is an absolute tragedy in that situation. People who are so dedicated they've stayed in their country, he could easily have earned far more by this. I'm sure this specialist that I mentioned before, he could get a much larger salary if he moved to the United States or United Kingdom. That'd be a certainty. So these are dedicated people, and they're dying in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, because they are not getting these vaccines. And then in this situation, and I don't think your everyday people and even the politicians, I don't think your average congressman in the United States actually realizes what is going on. When they have these arguments about they've got this AstraZeneca, and the United States has stockpiled tens of millions of doses of AstraZeneca. These are not advance orders. These have actually been made. They're sitting on shelves in the United States. And then they have these discussions, and then news stories, if you read them, they follow the US news as I do for some things. And then the US news, one of the things they talk about is, will these AstraZeneca vaccines that they're storing expire, that are sitting on the shelf? And then the experts then reassure them and say, no, they're not going to expire, and they still work. We shouldn't have discussions like that. That makes no sense. And if you look at this hypothetical civilization, 100,000 years from now, looking back at us and being, not to us, they would seem not far from the do, excuse me if I'm repeating myself, I'm not sure if I said this already, but one way I look about this, I got this cue from Mike Ryan. He said, how the future will think about us. So think about our civilization, say 100,000 years from now, and I'm sure we're not going to go extinct. We're at least at risk of extinction of any other species of mammals on Earth. And so 100,000 years from now, we will have a civilization, and our civilization in that future, and they will look at the historical records. They will probably have quite extensive records of our time. So they look at our time, and then I think they'll be absolutely baffled by us. And our technology will mean nothing to them. Whatever technology they have then, ours will seem very primitive, like punch cards and paper tape, but even not very primitive like that, probably seem to them more like just rubbing sticks together to make a fire at our level of technology compared to whatever they can do then. So it won't be the technology that they look at, it'll be, and they won't think of technology as being what marks something out as a civilization. They will think civilization is when you actually care for and look after each other, and when you're rational and logical. And they will look at our civilization, they will find us very puzzling. I'm sure there'll be numerous learned theses in the year 100,000 trying to understand our psychology and how we could live in a world like this and how it happened. So I don't think the average person in the United States has a clue as what's being done in their name, but these vaccines, the tens of millions, it's utterly grotesque to have tens of millions of vaccines sitting on shelves in the United States while doctors are dying around the world in the weaker economies like Africa and the poorer countries in Asia and things like that. It's not logical. It doesn't make any sense in terms of the economy. So these countries being very badly hit with it, and look at Brazil. I mean, Brazil has got one of the worst outbreaks, and they are vaccinating quickly, but not nearly as quick as they could. Think what a difference it would make to the Brazil outbreak if they had suddenly given tens of millions of doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. And the World Health Organization are saying that they can get these vaccines into people's arms straight away today. They say, just let's swap batches. They're saying to any country that's got spare vaccines, they say to them, and they're sitting on their shelves, and they either are not sure about the AstraZeneca yet, they've got vaccine hesitancy, or they haven't approved it yet, as is the case in the United States, then we can get these vaccines into people's arms today. Let's just swap batches, and you can have our batch later. So that's what would make logical, rational sense. And so that's the this is actually Dr. Mike Ryan the thing that I'm saying it's not fair. I recommend you watch that video. And so we don't know for sure if they're going to completely stop transmission. They're actually turning out to be pretty good with transmission. They do stop people dying. And we can't have a situation where frontline health workers and health workers, well, now they are risking their lives, and the most vulnerable are not accessing vaccines around the world. He says if we reach that situation where perfectly healthy people have been vaccinated, those frontline workers and vulnerable people are not, it's not fair, it's simply not fair. We have reached that situation. We are in that situation right now. These people are dying. And he says, unless we start to bring all countries out of this, we won't recover together. There will be long-term economic impacts if we leave countries behind. We are all in this together. And then he talks about, we've seen things in the last number of years that scare us all for the future, the pandemic, climate change, racism, all that. We simply need to start doing the things that turn the tide on this. And we are doing things with climate change. We are doing things with all these things. And he's saying this is one of the first opportunities to send a signal to the future. I was talking about our descendants 100,000 years from now. We will share more, we will do more together, make our planet and our environment and our populations healthy. So there are some, I talked about Brazil, about France is already giving 1 in 20. Now here, let's have a look at India is the example for the world. I think that our descendants, 100,000 years from now, if they're looking at our records from our day, then they will think that India is the most civilized country that we've got in terms of this pandemic. By far the most civilized of them all. They won't think the United States was civilized. They will think India was the most civilized. Because look at what India's been doing with its vaccines. It's really shown the example of what a civilized country can do. So this is, I think that one is Sri Lanka. And so Sri Lanka reached 0.5% well before India was only at about 0.25%. And then they started giving to Bangladesh, and they reached 1% well before, when India was only a bit over 0.5%, and well before India reached 1%. So India was incredibly generous, giving its vaccines away to its neighbours, the most vulnerable neighbours. And they're very close. And these are not vaccines they were selling. They were donating them for free. So India makes half its vaccines it sells to other countries. India is one of the vaccine hubs in the world that makes many of the world's vaccines. So India was selling vaccines to the wealthy countries, selling vaccines as well to COVAX. Then if it remains half of them, and of the half that it got for itself, then it was giving away so many doses to its neighbouring countries. I think it's half of what it retained, it actually gave away to other countries. So this is an example for us all. And so compared with that for United States, United Kingdom to give away 5% of our vaccines and every day vaccinate several times all the medical all the doctors in Zimbabwe every day, that many vaccines. And we got into our power to do that. Now, if you are in a wealthy country like I am, then do continue to get your vaccine. I'm not saying don't get vaccinated. By vaccinating, by stopping the pandemic in the United Kingdom, we're stopping it for the entire world. So it's not saying don't vaccinate in the countries where we are. We do need to get vaccinated. But we need to get our government to give away its vaccines, some of its vaccines. This is one way we could do that today. Don't need any technology transfer. We could do that today. United Kingdom, Boris Johnson could decide today, I'm going to follow France's example and give 5% of the UK's vaccines to poor countries like Sub-Saharan Africa. Boris Johnson could make that decision today, and Biden could make that decision in the United States today. And so we should put pressure on our world leaders to do this. Once you vaccinate all your most vulnerable, all the frontline workers, then the rest of the world is the priority. And one way that I like to think about it like this, and I think this may help you to see where I'm coming from if you aren't quite with me yet. Imagine that you were standing in a queue to be vaccinated, and imagine this chap was behind you in the queue. Then, and you know that he is one of the few doctors in Zimbabwe. Imagine he was in a queue in the United Kingdom, and he's one of the few. He's one of the few doctors in Zimbabwe, and that he's a leading specialist, and that the healthcare system there depends on him. Then, I think most people who've got anything like a warm heart at all, they would say, "Go in front of me. You need the vaccine much more than I do." Unless, of course, they themselves are frontline health workers, or they're very vulnerable or elderly themselves. But I'm talking about younger people. They would say, "Well, the world needs you, and I don't have risk of dying. My main risk is I do have risk of long COVID if you're a younger person, and you go, but you risk dying, and you're so important for your country." So I think most people with the heart would say that. Oh, I guess for some reason I've lost the capability of using my mouse. I must press some shortcut. Just a second. Oh, here we are, I'm back again. Okay. It got stuck on my other window for some reason. Okay, so right now, so that's the introduction. I suggest you watch this video. Say it's not fair. I've got the transcript there, and then I talked about the encouraging signs, and so now I want to talk about TRIPS, which, as I said, most of you have probably not even heard this on the news. So this is the fourth of 4 ways the World Health Organization say we can actually hugely increase the vaccines. The first of the 4 ways is to connect the companies that produce the vaccines with the ones that can put them into the syringes. And that's like the agreement that Biden negotiated between Merck and Johnson & Johnson. And the World Health Organization say that they know many companies around the world that can do the fill and finish if you can just provide them with the bulk vaccine, and they will put them into syringes for you. So they can do a matchmaking service, and that can help increase for companies that are trying to do both at once, like Johnson & Johnson were doing. Johnson & Johnson were doing both the fill and finish and the bulk production, and you can almost double the production by getting other companies to do the fill and finish for them. So that's one of the ways we can increase supply right now, today. Then another way is for other companies to follow the example of AstraZeneca. So they do that voluntarily. So in that case, you would incentivize the United States would be persuade Pfizer, Moderna, and the other companies to transfer the technology into voluntary licensing to the rest of the world. And to bear in mind, I mean, Brazil is not going to be buying the Pfizer, especially Zimbabwe is not going to be buying the Pfizer vaccine anyway. It's far, far too expensive. So why not get Pfizer to transfer technology to these other countries that are not going to buy it anyway, and empower them to make it, like AstraZeneca has done. Then the third method, and the World Health Organization did this already for H1N1, so it's tested, and that is to develop a global mechanism coordinated by the World Health Organization, coordinate transfer with universities and manufacturers. So for instance, Oxford University. It's Oxford University that made the vaccine, not AstraZeneca. Oxford University did the intellectual development of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Anyway, they did that for that. But so it's often universities are involved, and many academics were involved in developing the mRNA vaccines. It would be wrong to say that those vaccines are just the result of the Pfizer and Moderna people working for them. mRNA vaccines are the result of the coordinated work of the building up on the work of thousands of academics in universities around the world. It's eventually reached its fruition with the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccine. But most of those people who were involved in development were nothing to do with those companies, and they were doing academic research, again funded by the general public. That's public funded as well. So these vaccines they produce, building on all these previous academic research, which is also all publicly funded. A lot of that is publicly funded too. And then the final stage of the research was also publicly funded, and making the vaccines. So we coordinated technology transfer, and then the World Health Organization would facilitate the training of the staff. And remember, many of these academics in the rest of the world, nothing to do with Pfizer or Moderna, they actually did the research. They are very bright people who would know they would know what all these terms mean. They would understand the technology. They would understand the science behind it. Then you've got all the companies that could make it, and so technology transfer. So there's plenty of understanding, there's plenty of intelligence, there's plenty of medical know-how and scientific know-how around the world. That's not the problem. There's plenty of understanding to understand how to make this. So the World Health Organization is saying to coordinate transfer. So then the fourth thing, and this is the thing that most of you will not have heard of before, TRIPS. So what is TRIPS? So I'm going to explain TRIPS, and then this is a way, and then once I explain it, you'll start to wonder why. So this explains TRIPS. So that's you'll wonder, why are countries not using TRIPS? So this is under the World Trade Organization. I'll explain how it works. Any of these the green countries all belong to the World Trade Organization, and suppose, for instance, that and this is under the World Trade Organization rules, so it's permitted. In an emergency, and what could be more of an emergency than this, then India, for instance, could issue a compulsory license under TRIPS to make remdesivir, so any of the therapeutics, and it could also issue a compulsory license to make the Pfizer vaccine. And then it's then India that decides what remuneration to give to Pfizer under this license. It draws up the license itself, because Pfizer hasn't given them one. That is one that they can actually afford. So they make a compulsory license. And then once that has happened, then India would then be able to make the Pfizer vaccine, so long as they can find out how to do it. There's no intellectual or patent barrier anymore once you've done a compulsory license for the duration of the pandemic. And then, say, Bangladesh, which is not noted for making vaccines, so Bangladesh then would also issue a compulsory license under TRIPS, and then India would then be able to donate its vaccines that were made under TRIPS to Bangladesh, or sell them, but with a reasonable price that covers the manufacturing costs. So in that situation, India would then be able to export the Pfizer vaccine to any other country that invokes TRIPS. Now, the United Kingdom would not be able to invoke TRIPS. It would not be able to make the Pfizer vaccine, because you have to have a pandemic and emergency. You have to not be able to afford it. So the United Kingdom wouldn't be able to get cheap doses of the Pfizer vaccine from India, even though India is making them. The United Kingdom wouldn't be able to buy them from India, because in order to buy them, you need to have a compulsory license yourself. So that's the way TRIPS works. And so they're not going to lose the money that they get from selling their vaccines. Pfizer will still be able to sell its vaccine at full price to all the wealthy countries. But the poorer countries will then have compulsory license that let India, for instance, would be a very likely one to issue a compulsory license. And then India would then be able to make the vaccines for all the countries that have issued TRIPS compulsory licenses. So then you might ask, well, why isn't this going on? I mean, under TRIPS, they don't need to ask permission of wealthy countries to do this. India could just do this today under TRIPS. It's totally legal to do that. Well, so why doesn't it do it? Well, the reason is because of experience from the past, that when they do that, then the wealthy countries, they retaliate. For instance, Thailand issued a compulsory license for the Abbott's HIV drug, and Abbott withdrew 7 drugs from Thailand, 7 new drug applications from Thailand in retaliation. Thailand also tried to produce a generic version of an HIV drug, and the United States threatened trade sanctions and it forced Thailand to amend its domestic laws to restrict compulsory licenses, so they couldn't do that. Another example, India tried to and this is all under TRIPS. These are all TRIPS compulsory licenses. So India did a TRIPS compulsory license for a patented cancer drug called Nexavar that they needed. And Bayer Pharmaceuticals then did a legal case, and this they eventually lost their legal case, but this again is something countries don't want to face, is expensive legal cases with the wealthy countries, with their wealthy lawyers, in their own domestic legal system, but fighting them in their legal system to prevent them from making these drugs under TRIPS. So that's why these countries don't do that. That's why it's not happening already. So the World Health Organization are asking the wealthy countries to do a waiver of intellectual property rights related to COVAX, related to the COVID pandemic, related to the harm, to the just for things that are needed to treat COVID, not for anything else. So basically, they're asking the wealthy countries to put their blessing on TRIPS and say that they're not going to use trade sanctions or withdraw drugs or in other ways penalise countries that do these compulsory licenses. And so far, United Kingdom and the United States are refusing to agree to this. And the many doctors and health workers around the world are saying to the governments, you must do this. So any of these, so there are these four things. So there's the first, there's the second is to encourage the companies to do voluntary license. They haven't done that. The World Health Organization have been trying all these things. The World Health Organization have been trying to encourage these companies to issue these voluntary licenses. They're not doing it. They've tried to encourage the governments to do that. They're not doing it. So their last thing is TRIPS. It's the last resort because they aren't doing the other things. So the question that all of us should be asking of our governments, and say to our governments, it's because of taxpayer dollars that you've done this, that you've made these vaccines. The vaccines are actually based on publicly funded research over decades by experts in our universities. They didn't just make it from nothing. And the vaccine companies, they have no financial risk. It just doesn't make sense. You are actually harming your own population by not doing this, because you are damaging the economies of these other countries that are having to fight. I mean, look at Brazil, for instance, having to fight its economy, fight the pandemic, and all the countries, Zimbabwe and other countries in Africa. This is not benefiting anyone, and this is harming the rest of the world, because while they're fighting, then their economy is not going to recover. How can their economy recover when they're fighting the pandemic? It's also things like tourism. So once we start opening up to tourism again, and if we don't do this, in large areas of the world will have raging epidemics locally. So when tourists want to go on a tourist trip to Zimbabwe will be a country with a raging epidemic of COVID. And you might get it. Even with the vaccine, you're not 100% protected. And so it just totally self-serving. So I think 100,000 years from now, looking back now, they just won't understand us. They find it very difficult to understand our psychology, why we haven't done this. And if we'd done this in December, then by now, in March, we would already have many countries already producing the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, all these vaccines, and the therapeutics. So that is the reason why we've got this bottleneck, why it is such a narrow bottleneck. It would be a bottleneck anyway, but it would be hugely less. And I watched nearly every World Health Organization press briefing. I think I've watched every one. I don't know if I missed one, since January 2020. And the last few ones, then it's been countries, it's heart-wrenching really, and people from these countries talking about how they can make these vaccines. They're pleading with the wealthy countries to permit them to make it and to transfer the technology. That's been the main theme of the World Health Organization for the last several press briefings, and yet it hasn't got into the BBC News yet. I've never seen anything on the BBC News about that. I haven't seen TRIPS mentioned. Have you heard TRIPS mentioned yet? I think very few people in the wealthy countries have heard of this. So those are the things. It's not fair. It's in our own interests. So there are these encouraging signs. So maybe I'll just finally do a quick overview of the whole thing. How I've done everything. So I'll just go through my whole article from the beginning. Let's see. So yes, so we've got these, we've got a huge excess we've got huge numbers of doses already pre-ordered. It's 5.45 billion. The vaccine per day going up and up. These marvellous vaccines that we've got, and they're just so effective, and that's why we've got so many. Just incredible feat of science. And remember, the science is built on the work of researchers around the world. It's not just the vaccine companies. It's just a huge amount of science advances, mainly most of it, a lot of it public funding. I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of science down in the world is public funding in medicine. I don't know, but certainly a lot of it is. And it's because of this that we've got this very fast development of these vaccines. And we've got pre-orders enough to vaccinate. Actually, if all the vaccines do indeed get approved, as seems very likely, then we can vaccinate the entire world by the end of 2021. So that's a hugely positive thing, and vaccinate 2 billion people on top of that. And these numbers keep going up. So by the end of 2021, it will probably vaccinate more than 2 billion people a second time if they all get approved. So the big shortage is right now, which is the 3%, that the COVAX will only be able to vaccinate 3% by the summer, whereas the wealthy countries are vaccinating all the others that aren't vaccinated. And then they go on to the children, of course, once that has passed clinical trials. When it comes to 2022, then we will be able to vaccinate everyone 4 times over, every quarter, if COVID-19 is still raging. And then something to bear in mind, oh yes, I haven't mentioned that yet because it's not in the article, I'll just mention this now, that these vaccines are just first generation technology. For instance, for the Pfizer vaccine is the first one to be approved. It's still the best, but there's no reason to suppose that Pfizer is the best possible. And in Israel, the Pfizer vaccine, then based on the Pfizer and Israel have an agreement together with Pfizer, Israel buying lots of the early Pfizer doses. In exchange, they are doing a lot of medical research in collaboration with Israel. And they have found that, using matched cohort studies, that the COVID, that the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine in Israel, with the B117 variant, the one that was first identified in the United Kingdom, the vaccine is stopping 97%. In other words, if previously you were going to have 100 people infected, you now only get 3 that show symptoms, and only 6, even including asymptomatic cases, that show that get COVID. So this is incredibly good news, fantastic news. That this means that if you had an outbreak of, say, 100 hotspots, suddenly for some reason you had 100, let's not say how it happens, but you've got 100 people for some reason are left over that still have COVID. And then say you vaccinate everyone, then you've got 100 people who've got COVID. And then these people, even if they just go, if they are doing enough to keep the arm down to 1, then there will only be 6 that they'd infect, then that would be gone. Those 6 would probably not infect anyone. And then if instead they're just going on doing a normal thing, and maybe every person infects 2 or even 3 people, still there would be a few steps before you're down to no cases. So this means that the Pfizer vaccine, together with COVID-19, can locally eliminate COVID-19 from Israel. So I think I'll talk a little bit about this elimination thing. Scotland, I was very pleased to hear that Scotland are now saying that they're aiming for elimination of COVID. Flu is the only serious disease that kills lots of people where we don't aim to eliminate it. With measles, there's no country says there's an acceptable level that if 1,000 people die of measles, then you're okay. You've controlled it. Nobody would. If 1,000 people died from measles in the United Kingdom, we would not say that's okay. We would not say it's okay for 1,000 people to die of polio in the United Kingdom, or for 1,000 people to die of any other deadly disease. It's only for flu, and that's only because we don't know how to we are not able to suppress it. But with COVID, then a fifth of the world population has already eliminated it without a vaccine. No country has ever eliminated flu. But a fifth of the world population, including New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, Vietnam, China, and Vietnam and China are landlocked, so it's not just islands. Like I've got land boundaries, so it's not just islands. They're eliminated. Taiwan never even had to have a lockdown of any description because they were so fast to test, trace, isolate. So, unlike flu, COVID can be eliminated, we know that. And now we have a second way to eliminate it with the vaccine. So this hasn't happened yet, and part of the reason it's still raging in Israel would be they're not vaccinating the Palestinians. I think that's a similar thing. It's totally stupid for the Israelis not to vaccinate Palestinians just from self-interest. Because the Palestinians, especially on the West Bank, are mingling with the Israelis and they'll be spreading COVID-19 to the Israelis. So you don't really see totally the effect of vaccination in Israel until they vaccinate the Palestinians. And then, of course, once they vaccinate the young people as well, then that will really show what the possibility is. Once we've done that, once they vaccinate the Palestinians and they vaccinated the young people, which they'll be doing later once the trials are all completed for young people, young children, I mean, then we should see it eliminated from Israel. I don't see how it can't be eliminated, especially if we keep a lid on the variants. So we can eliminate it. And the World Health Organization, they actually say that we can stop it. We can stop COVID. We can stop the pandemic. And I've just been here in the United Kingdom, we heard, I can't remember, it was our chief medical officer, and he said that we have to resign to having COVID for the indefinite future, and the world will never eliminate it. The reason that people are resigning is because they're not putting everything behind eliminating it. So not empowering the rest of the world to eliminate it, but it will simmer on in the rest of the world if they don't have the vaccines. But we can eliminate it, and especially if we can empower the rest of the world to make the most effective vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, or whichever turns out to be the most effective, because there are more coming down the stream, and some of them may be even more effective. So why not empower everyone to make all the vaccines and make the most effective for their variant in their country? So anyway, yes, so that's that. So I explained about, so that's an action bit I added about elimination there. So this plenty of world after fast, and India and South Africa leading a coalition asking for a temporary suspension of intellectual, that's the whole TRIPS thing, especially vaccines developed during public funds. I suggest listening to the World Health Organization talk about this. And then this is the actual there's a paper here you can click through. Where is it now? They're called for global vaccine equity. You can read their declaration there. And so I summarise what they say in the article. You can read the details there. And they say, in a world where there are enormous inequities, COVID vaccinations offers the opportunity to provide everyone globally, regardless of income, race or nationality, immunological equity to be protected from SARS-CoV-2. The COVID-19 pandemic will not be over for us until it is over for everyone. So instead of just resign and say it's not going to be over for us, which is what the UK seems to be doing, then say let's get it over with. And then I explained about the TRIPS agreement, I don't need to explain it all again, and about the doctors that are dying, and about the few doctors who explained that, so it's not fair. I think I read that out, some of that. Encouraging science, so it's good things. Many countries are actually starting, especially India. India is an example of, India is the civilized nation in terms of this. It's showing true, the marks of true civilization in the way it's dealing with its vaccines. And the rest of us can too. And then this, as Dr. Tedros said about the TRIPS agreement, if now is not the time to use those provisions for emergencies, remember that they're just not being used because the advanced economies are just stopping the other countries from using them. And Dr. Tedros is saying these provisions are there for use in emergencies. If now is not the time to use them, then when? This is an unprecedented time, and the World Health Organization believes this is a time to trigger that provision and waive patent rights. So the United States and the United Kingdom should immediately stop blocking the use of TRIPS. Or if that's not, if you are still not prepared to do that, what is your solution? So we should, as members, as citizens of our countries, we should ask our governments, if you are not going to let them, if you're going to continue to block TRIPS, then what is your solution? Come up with something else. We need something urgently, we need it now, we need it this week. If it's not TRIPS, what is it? And we've got this other one, the number 3, coordinated technology transfer. What about that? Do that then. If you can't do TRIPS, do that. Do something. You've got to do something. It's not right. It's not right for all of us. And then, and as Mike Ryan says here, we follow the example of Australia and then add vaccine equity as well. But Australia stopped it without the vaccine. Add vaccine equity as well, and we can make this pandemic history. And then, as they said one of the earlier, social media Q sachets, this is the way to stop it very quickly, do it all. So the COVID-19 toolbox, face coverings, contact tracing, physical distancing, vaccination now, mass testing is another way to stop it quickly, hand hygiene, quarantine and isolation. It's very important to quarantine if you've got COVID. I've talked about that before. Quarantine and isolation help the public understand why you do that. You should protect your own household most of all. So I've got some links for some of those things at the bottom here. And so that's that. So let's do this. Let's become civilization. So that's make our first step to become a true civilization, instead of just a bunch of people who've got technology, but an actual true civilization. And this is how we can do it. Okay, so I'll upload this now. So I want to encourage. I know this is rather long, but I find it difficult to say short. But anyway, whatever reason, hopefully this, if you're still listening to this, obviously, if you're still here, then it wasn't too long for you, you've listened to the end. So if you are social, if you're an influencer, if you're a journalist, then if you're an influencer or a journalist, or if you or anything else, just share it in your own way, and please try. Sorry, I don't do that. In your own way. Sorry about that noise. It's just me. My keyboard moved. If you are an influencer, then please try and share this understanding of this with the rest of the world. Help people to understand. People just don't know what's being done in their name, and explain in your own way. But use. Please encourage you to use. Please use reliable sources and represent, especially the World Health Organization, and represent it properly. Let's try and get. And I'll put a link to this in my video description. I linked lots of sources. Go straight to the World Health Organization. Go to the other source, and please can we somehow together spread awareness, and do share and like this video, share my article, and write your own articles, write your own blog posts, make your videos, and let's spread awareness of what's actually going on and what we can do, and let's become a true civilization as we do this.